Good morning. It is Tuesday, March 22nd. We're here for the regular Commissioner Board meeting. We have Commissioner Brad Peck and myself in the chamber and Commissioner Mullen on the phone with our administrator and the clerk of the board. At this point in time, I'll call the meeting to order, and if you'd please rise to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from March 1st. Is there any additions, corrections, or?
No.
Commissioner Mullen?
No corrections.
Okay. Next, we have the office business, approval of vouchers. I believe we have one.
Appears we have two items this morning. One is fund expenditures, the other is salary clearing. Start with fund expenditures. Move for approval of fund expenditures in the amount of $185,718.71 as presented. Note that it's been reported to us and signed off by two members of the auditor's office.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
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 Second item is salary clearing payroll and emergency management payroll in the aggregate total of $1,008,908.40. Note that this as well is presented by the auditor's office and signed off by two members of that office.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
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 Next, we're down to the Commissioner Administrator updates. Keith.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chairman. Participated in a couple of meetings this last week, one with my counterparts across the state to kind of wrap up the legislative session, the discussion of items relative to county government. Also participated in the Wasatch call yesterday with the state's Attorney General that provided some update on the opioid litigation as well as some other legal matters. We've been beginning work on the Benton County, Franklin County Mental Health Advisory Board. Last week we sent out a joint press release and a application to be completed by those who may be interested in serving on that task force. We've received a handful of applications so far, but we've left that open till I believe the end of April for them to submit their proposals for serving on that board, and then this board will then make a final determination of who serves on that committee. Working a lot on the shoreline reconveyance issue. We're going to be traveling some of the sites tomorrow with representatives from the Umatilla tribe, and that discussion is ongoing, leading toward federal legislation to make that possible. Also participated in the west region of NACO. They had an update on some issues that are important to the county related to ARPA, related to infrastructure funding, and the secure rural schools, and ultimately that will affect some of the PILT payments that affect timber counties, but also recognizing the DOE commitment to PILT for Franklin County. So those are the highlights of the things I've been working on mostly the past week.
Commissioner Peck.
Let's see, this week had the first meeting of the Washington State Aerospace and Aviation Committee or Commission. That's a group that was established by legislative directive to work on economic development issues in the aerospace and aviation industry. There are several subcommittees. They range everywhere from unpiloted remote vehicles for, let's say, overflying and evaluating crops to human transport in urban areas, all the way up to advanced research projects and commercial aerospace, aircraft maintenance, development, so forth. Pretty extensive committee. There is one county representative, myself, from the state, and it's it's a great opportunity for all of our aviation industry in the state to try and avoid losing major aerospace players as we did several years ago when Boeing moved their headquarters. I believe that's what drove the initiative. Benton Franklin Economic Development District meeting on Friday. We approved some additional local loans, and this time it was for business properties in Prosser, as I recall. Also, Council of Governments meeting same day. Legislative Steering Committee with WASAC on Friday, going through and unraveling what actions the legislature took this session. And then yesterday afternoon, the same meeting that Mr. Johnson was in with Attorney General Ferguson, which, as I recall, the state is currently on track to receive something just shy of $200 million. There is an interesting and pending issue related to that settlement, and it's whether or not the parties being held liable, in particular the Sackler family, would or would not be immune to any kind of civil judgments. And I think that's an important and still pending question. Thanks.
Commissioner Mullen? Commissioner Mullen, do you have an update of your activity last week? Did we lose him?
Commissioner, you may be muted. Are you still on the line?
Okay, I'll go through mine. First, I had a meeting budget review at the courthouse here. We're in very good shape due to our sales tax increase. Had a law library meeting. We're still looking for a location. CBC asked us to remove ourselves from their location, so we're looking for a new location for the law library here in Franklin County. Agenda meeting first thing Thursday morning, and then the Columbia River Caucus meeting. And then I had a meeting with Michelle Gerber and our state representative Brad Clippard on this possibility of purchasing the old Kennewick General. Seems that they're trying to put a lot of restrictions on them as far as what they can do for numbers, and I don't think once they sell they should have any say in anything. If they want to sell to us, they sell to us. If not, they can't put restrictions on us on how many mentally ill patients we can have at the location. That's my thoughts anyway. And then I had a meeting with our clerks about the statement I made, and I asked for the email exchange. Come to find out that the Benton Franklin Superior Court clerk is the one that alerted the plaintiffs, not our clerk's department. So I'd like to apologize for them and make it clear that it was the Benton Franklin Superior Court clerks that alerted the plaintiffs in the case. That's it for me. Commissioner Mullen, are you now back with us?
I am. I had a problem with my mute button. So last week we had the Benefits Committee meeting. The Health Department meeting was canceled. Discussions with Derek Pratt in planning about ongoing building permits. Most of the engineering companies are backlogged, so if you have a building permit that you need to get submitted, I would encourage people to do it as quickly as possible, as soon as possible, just in order to try to speed up that process for your permit. Also, there's still openings on the Planning Commission. If anyone is interested in serving on that board, I would contact Derek Bratton in Planning. That is all. Thank you.
All right. Move down to public comment. Anybody for public comment?
George Dockstetter, Self Landing Road. There's an article in the paper, I forget what day it was, but it was the city of Pasco inviting public comment on how to handle all the traffic on Road 100 interchange and proposed so-called development where the Costco supposedly is going. I would like to point out that the easiest thing to alleviate all those traffic problems there and on Road 68 is for us to get together with the other entities in Benton and Franklin County, and let's start getting serious about putting another bridge across the river north of town. That would alleviate not only the bypass going around Richland, it would alleviate all the traffic coming out. A lot of it could head north. It's already a pain in the ass getting on Taylor Flats and Glade at certain times of the day, but this is going to make the rest of town a whole lot easier to get around in. And the other thing that's been in the paper and the news that everybody's aware of is inflation. So I would like to urge the county commissioners and the administrator to see if there's some way we can funnel some of that so-called COVID money into a reserve account, because next year your guys are going to be facing a hell of a COLA increase for all our employees. And it's probably going to be more than 1 year. It's probably going to be 2 or 3 years. Thank you for your time.
Anyone else for public comment? Keith, anybody on the phone?
No one on the phone.
Seeing none, we'll move on down to the next item on the agenda, the Confederate Tribes of the Colville Reservation presentation, please. Morning, Billy.
Good morning, Commissioners, and thank you for the opportunity to give an update. So we've got an agreement or a template that I think has been shared with you, and like to answer some questions and provide a little more insight on that. A quick update on the fee to trust, and then maybe just some follow-up on what payment in lieu of taxes may look like. We've had some discussions with the court about that, and like to get your perspectives on that as well. So with that, I will pass it to Alice to go over the agreement or draft agreement.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Am I recording or whatever? Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Alice Koskela. I'm a contract attorney for the Colville Tribes, and I've been working on what we're calling the Pasco Economic Development Project for about the past 4 years. As you probably know, the tribe purchased property in 2019 in Pasco. Since then, the tribes has signed an agreement in principle with the Pasco City Council and a letter of intent with Franklin PUD regarding the potential lease of tribal property for a substation there, and also other agreements that are either in the process or have been signed with local entities. This is what we have today, a cooperation agreement, as we're calling it, which is basically an agreement to cooperate in the future with regard to the Pasco Economic Development Project. And I'm going to defer questions about the specifics of that to Cody and Billy. But this agreement sets out some guidelines for cooperation in the future. It indicates that the Commission is in favor of the project, which we believe will bring great economic development opportunities to this area, and a few other boilerplate issues. And I can either go through the agreement or answer your questions, whichever you prefer. And if I go through it, I'll be mercifully short, I promise, because I wrote myself out a little cheat sheet so I don't read to you. Okay. So the first part of the agreement is the recital section. A recital section of any agreement is pretty much establishing the background, who the parties are, what their legal authorities are to sign the agreement, what their general intents are, and just sets up a framework for future cooperation. That's the recital. Section 1.0, that talks about how we would communicate in the future. As in other agreements that we've already signed with other entities, we would designate a point person for communications. I know that most of you are familiar with Billy Gunn. He's down here a lot. You would designate a point person so that we'd know who to contact with information or to request information. That doesn't mean you can't contact anybody that you want to on our side. You can, and we would also feel free to contact any of you. Then, as it goes down, we would provide public information to each other. We'd meet on a regular basis. We'd share media releases. With Pasco and the PUD, we did a joint media release when the letter of intent was signed. And we'll be coming back to you for a future agreement for use of HAPO Center for public relations materials to be distributed regarding this project. One of the more important things is that you would consider approval of a jail agreement, because we would need that in the future, as we would be funding part of your jail population that is the result of anything that goes on the property, the tribal property, once it's taken into trust. We might need a solid waste agreement. We'll update you regularly on fee to trust. You provide a letter of support for the project. And I want to add, it's very important that the BIA sees that we have good government support, because that's what they're looking for, is local government support. And then finally, we'll address cooperative efforts in the future to enhance the local economy. The rest of it is pretty much boilerplate, severability, termination, scope, effective date. So that's my nutshell on the agreement, and I'm happy to stand for questions.
Questions, Commissioner?
Well, first off, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
for
you very
coming in
much.
and speaking with us. I don't think I've spoken or seen any of you since we had our initial meetings a few years ago over at I think it was at the Red Lion, if I recall.
Right, the City Hall
And
meetings.
that was a nice opportunity to get acquainted and get familiar with the direction you were moving in. Appreciate the follow-up today. Really, there are a couple of broad categories here. I think one is an initial legal review, wherein our legal counsel goes through any proposed letters of intent or agreement, and it just ensures that we've deconflicted as much as possible all the various legal and other interests. And then it comes to this board for basically a policy determination. So at this point, I really don't have any hard questions or even concerns. I think I understand the path you're on, what it is you're looking to do. I don't have a particular bias for or against. I certainly appreciate anyone who comes to our community and wants to bring economic development dollars and help us build a community. And just looking forward to seeing a review through our legal counsel on any proposed drafts, and be happy to entertain those when they come. And if you've got any questions you want to ask me, to the extent that I can, I'm open to that as well.
Commissioner Mullen?
No real questions at this.
Okay. And I don't have any questions either. I mean, I sit in on the Port of Pasco's meetings, and I know that their concerns are our concerns, and we're all looking for direction here as far as where the litigation is or what is transpiring between the Yakima tribe and the Colville tribe, because we don't want to get in between a dispute between the two tribes. So we're looking for finality in that, is myself, because being partners with both, I don't want to create a conflict. So that's where I'm sitting right now. Yes, go ahead.
And if I could, just to explain the fee to trust process and why these agreements are so vague and non-committal at this point. So
Right.
the BIA regulations require that there's cooperation between partners in the local and county governments. But it's also very mindful about any encumbrances that the federal government would inherit as part of the agreements, and those are subject to potential denial of the fee to trust application. So we've got to be careful, and we'd love to get to more definitive terms once that happens, but at this point, we're probably at least a couple of years out, depending on how fast the federal government can move on the fee to trust application review and approval process. So just wanted to make that clear. And otherwise, one part of this is that we will give updates on the fee to trust process. It's a lengthy process, 14 steps. The application is almost complete. We've put a ton of work into that to make sure it's as complete as possible, because we want to ensure that once it starts down the path, it continues down the path for review and approval. And typically that's a 2 to 5 year process. We're hoping that will be faster. A lot of the environmental work has been done in advance. There will be an environmental impact statement for one of the fee to trust applications and environmental assessment for the other. So there'll be opportunities for public comment on our conversion process, along with the meetings we're participating in with local government agencies as well.
You know, I would just add, you alluded to it a little bit with your reference to PILT, and I'm not obviously expecting anybody to be able to articulate any details about payment in lieu of taxes. But I wonder if you'd maybe like to take the opportunity for the benefit of the public, because this is a recorded meeting. There's a video that goes on our website, to maybe give a little bit of perspective on when you come into a community and you're developing an economic project, what the basics of the deed of trust process is. I'm not sure everybody understands trust lands and the transfer that takes place, nor do I think they maybe have a real good understanding of how the parties partner, and the tribe potentially would provide economic support for costs incurred by local governments. So maybe just a little bit of a primer on that for the benefit of the record, and for people who maybe haven't already had the benefit of a little bit of education on the subject.
Sure. So the property right now is owned in fee simple status by the Colville tribal government. The process for fee to trust conversion would convert that property into trust status owned by the federal government, held in trust for the benefit of the Colville tribes. And again, there's a lengthy review process associated with that. As you guys know, that once land is converted to federal ownership, it's no longer taxable. So the state compact that the Colville tribe has with the state of Washington requires that 2% of the revenues go towards reinvestment in local or tribal communities. So we've got a couple models of that. This is the first one that's really been far enough away from the reservation or off a current public domain allotment that we will have to go down that road. But there are example agreements in place. I think there's a number of them across the state that we could use as examples. And that 2% is intended to cover what those costs are. So since the property isn't being taxed to pay for those essential governmental services that the counties and the cities are providing, we can allocate that to help offset those costs, and then whatever other contributions we might have to the local economy and community.
And those kinds of things presumably would be costs of jail services, law enforcement, emergency response, solid waste, so forth.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. And did you mention a particular percentage? Did I hear you say 2%?
Yes, sir. That's required as a minimum in the compact we have with the state of Washington.
Okay. And without getting into the specifics of this particular project, that's the minimum. The actual number would likely be a cooperative negotiated process between potentially affected communities and the tribes?
Correct,
Yeah.
depending on the service need.
Right, right.
Yep.
And point taken that the level of service required varies in every situation. That's why it's essentially a negotiated discussion about what sort of services would be required and to what extent.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you for sort of laying that out. I believe that there's fairly broad lack of understanding simply on the matter of trust lands and the conversion of lands into federal ownership under trust. So, thanks again.
Keith, you had a question?
Yeah, I essentially had some of the same question that Commissioner Peck just asked, but perhaps you could help me with my limited understanding. Is the fee to trust question Is your plans for the property solely contingent upon that getting done? I mean, it sounds like that's not a foregone conclusion that it will get approved. What happens if for some reason the federal government decides that they don't want to make that conversion?
Then it wouldn't be eligible as a gaming site without that conversion. So we would have to consider other plans for it. I mean,
Okay,
we could still move forward with some of the business plans we have. Those aren't contingent on conversion, but some of the current tax compacts we have with the state wouldn't apply if that conversion did not happen.
Okay, thank you. That was the piece I was missing, so I
Okay.
appreciate that. Thank you.
And that conversion process is not quick or necessarily easy. Maybe you could speak to historically what the timeline has been and just the generic process.
Yes, sir. And again, it's a 14-step process. It's once we submit the application, that gets us to step 2, and most of the process after that is dictated by timelines within the Bureau of Indian Affairs and ultimately subject to approval by the Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs. So it's a lengthy process with high-level officials reviewing the document at many different stops, and again, will be subject to a NEPA analysis. 2 separate, actually, in this situation, because there's 2 different levels of analysis and decisions needed, depending on whether it's the non-gaming properties or the gaming properties.
And in the case of gaming properties, is that, do I recall that it's not unusual for that to be a multi-year, maybe 5-year process or even more?
Yes, there's a number of examples, Spokane's maybe being the most recent that you guys are aware of, and they went through a different process. They went through a fee to trust process and then a secondary gaming designation process, so theirs maybe took twice as long as it could have.
Okay.
So we made the decision to do both of those concurrently, and that's accomplished through 2 separate applications in the federal regulations. There's a 151, which covers the fee to trust, and then the 292, which accomplishes the gaming designation. But we will submit both of those applications concurrently. And we've done a ton of work, as I said, to get this application ready. And once that's submitted to BIA, we'll be able to share more of this information publicly once we've had review from them to make sure that what we have is satisfactory to BIA standards.
Yeah. And do those tend to run, well, you've already articulated, they essentially run in parallel. Are they roughly the same timeline, or is one noticeably shorter process than the other?
They're typically about the same timeline. A lot of the
Okay.
same type of review goes into each of them. The process is essentially the same outside of the Office of Indian Gaming having some further review on the 292 application, and that's really more from the business perspective than just the federal government's inherent responsibility to the tribes and other interested stakeholders.
Okay, thank you. That helps.
And when do you think you might start step 1?
So we should submit the application within the month, I think. That's been pending some survey work. So we need certificates to show that we have an accurate legal description and an accurate survey recorded, and that's subject to BLM approval. So we've had a little trouble with folks out on COVID and teleworking, so they've been a little tough to get in contact with. So once that happens, my hope is within the month we'll have that submitted. And then again, once that's a public document shared with the federal government and subject to FOIA, we can share more information.
All right. Any other questions? Commissioner Mullen, any questions? Well, we sure appreciate you.
Yeah.
Go ahead. No questions?
I was just going to ask if the 2% that's at the minimum and that's negotiable.
The 2%, is that negotiable, or is that?
It is, and again, kind of dependent on the services that we are requesting from the local governments versus how many the tribe would provide itself. I'm confident the compacts are available online, but we could share a copy so you could review the language specifically, and if that's something your attorneys wanted to look at, we could share with them as well.
Thank you. And Mr. Gunn, you?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Billy Gunn.
Yeah, we need the mic.
Excuse me. Billy Gunn, I am the manager for the Pasco Economic Development Project, and I'm on the ground in Pasco. And I would be more than happy just quarterly or every 6 months to come and give you an update on how the Feed of Trust is going. I deal with the city managers there for Pasco. talk to the port people quite often, and I wouldn't even mind coming here and explaining how things are going. If it's going slower than we anticipate, we don't know that yet, but we're hoping not. And also, we're getting involved in the community. We have been very involved in the community. Yesterday, I met with the Cinco de Mayo people, that we are going to be part of Cinco de Mayo. We're bringing drummers and dancers down for Cinco de Mayo. And just so you know, so are the Yakimas. And we don't anticipate no conflicts. This is a celebration, and we're going to be part of that celebration. Yeah. So anyway, whenever you have questions, I'll leave you my card. If you want me to come over, I can do that. I would look forward to talking to you. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Gunn. Thank you very much. Is there anything else? Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to add, if your attorney has any questions and would like to contact me, Billy, I'll give Billy the information to get to you. I didn't bring a card, but if you can.
And if you might leave it with Mr. Johnson, because he is the one that can get in touch with everybody.
Okay, all right. Then I'll be happy to answer any legal questions or any questions on the agreement as proposed from your legal counsel. So.
And I want to thank you very much for coming and presenting to the board, because, this could be very good for our community, and we just want to make sure that we don't ruffle anybody's backside. We want everybody to be feeling included and welcome in Franklin County. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
All right, next on the agenda is the Benton Franklin Council of Governments update. And Michelle Hoyt.
Well, good morning, Commissioners and Administrator Johnson. I'm happy to be here to talk to you about the Benton Franklin Council of Governments. My name is Michelle Holt, and I am the Executive Director at the COG. I came to the Tri-Cities area in February of last year, so I've just completed my first year as a Tri-Citian and with the COG. I came from Eastern Idaho, and so it has been an interesting year of acclimating to a new state, a new community in the middle of a pandemic, and building relationships and getting to know the 17 jurisdictions that are members of our association. So it was really important to me to have time to come and address each of our members. And one of the priorities that our board asked of me was to elevate the value and the understanding that our members have of what the COG is and what it can be, and how we partner with the jurisdiction. So that's part of my purpose today. And of course, I have to apologize to Commissioner Didier because this is a repeat for you.
Yep.
Benton Franklin Transit, or Ben Franklin Transit, is one of our member entities, and I addressed them a week or two ago, and Commissioner Didier was there. So you'll let me know if I miss anything.
I noticed you were pretty thorough. You won't miss anything.
Well, and my apologies for that. When I talked to our board and asked them what was the most important thing I could do in addressing our jurisdictions, they unanimously said, please provide just a 101 overview of what is the COG, because there really is a lot of complexity to what we do, and especially in those jurisdictions that have a lot of elected turnover, we end up with folks who really have no idea what it is that we do at the COG. All right, well, the Benton Franklin Council of Governments, we were established in 1966 by voluntary association of the local units of government to provide a forum for improved communications, multi-jurisdictional decision-making, regional planning, and lead agency capacity for the provision of multi-jurisdictional programs. The services we provide are outlined in interlocal agreement, and they can evolve with the needs of our region. So currently, we have multiple designations that we hold on behalf of the Benton Franklin area. We are the Regional Planning Commission by RCW, as well as a Conference or Council of Governments, also by RCW. Under the Washington State Department of Transportation, we are the Regional Transportation Planning Organization. And under the Federal Highway Administration and Federal Transit Authority, we are the Metropolitan Planning Organization. And because our population is over 250,000, we are also a transportation management area on behalf of the region. And then additionally, under the U.S. Department of Commerce Economic Development Administration, we are the Economic Development District. Truly a question we get most often is, what is the Council of Governments? And by RCW, we exist to study regional governmental problems of mutual interest or concern, formulate recommendations for review and action by our member jurisdictions' legislative bodies. So truly, councils of governments are very unique, and they should reflect the needs and respective desires of the jurisdictions within that region. So in my experience, for example, our neighbors in Yakima, their Council of Governments host a homelessness program on behalf of their region, as well as a newly formed housing authority. Two of the councils of governments I worked with in Idaho, one was a host to a Veterans Affairs program in the Area Office on Aging. The other was very involved in lending, both for entrepreneurs and municipalities for infrastructure projects. So they are very unique, and really what dictates what the COG gets involved in for the region comes from our member jurisdictions. So in a nutshell, we convene local governments to collaboratively plan, fund, and administer solutions to shared community needs. Because it is a somewhat complex organization, we have developed this graphic to, in one spot, show what are the areas and roles that the COG is involved in. So as a regional planning agency, our specific mandate by RCW is to initiate regional planning programs, accept grants and aid, receive state and federal funding specifically for planning and in the interest of furthering planning for the region. So that's where our MPO, our TPO, those transportation programs fall under that RCW, as well as the Economic Development District and those activities. And of course, the marriage of economic development and transportation becomes land use. Under the newest Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act, the responsibilities of metropolitan planning organizations have been expanded somewhat to intersect more, no transportation pun intended with the intersection, but where transportation meets land use needs. So we're actually requested and expected to be coordinating with local housing authorities, for example, looking at how transportation moves people from where they live to where they work. And what that looks like on behalf of our region. So under regional planning, there are multiple activities that we conduct on behalf of the region, many of which, if they weren't handled by the COG, would be the responsibility of each individual jurisdiction to do specifically. Just a couple of the largest, most broad scale. One is our call for projects. This happens every 2 to 3 years. And through WashDOT and pass-through funds from federal programs, roughly $5 million a year is made available for local multimodal projects, and it's a competitive process that's handled under our Transportation Advisory Council. So those projects are ranked and determined for priority by the transportation staff from each of the jurisdictions in the region. This funding is only available through jurisdictions through the MPO, so that's the only way that our local communities can access those dollars. We do put together every 4 years a 20-year update of our Metropolitan Transportation Plan. That is the long-range plan for the region, and it's the framework that allows for anticipated investments in state, federal, and local funds. Transportation projects that aren't listed in this Metropolitan Transportation Plan are not eligible for state or federal transportation dollars. So it's very important that we work in cooperation with our jurisdictions to ensure that you all can access those funds that you're entitled to. The Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP, is Washington State's project software. Again, all of the infrastructure projects have got to be listed in there in order to be eligible for state or federal pass-through funds. And so we manage that program on behalf of the jurisdictions in our region and make monthly updates as our communities change what they're going to allocate for spending for projects. The regional transportation priorities are set through the COG, highlighting the highest priority projects that have been adopted. Again, this listing becomes very helpful for local, state, or federal agencies to accomplish their planning tasks, and also provides important information when jurisdictions are intending to seek funding or make grant applications. Under the Comprehensive Planning Growth Management Act certification, we do review our jurisdiction's transportation elements to ensure that they meet consistency with the GMA requirements and issue that certification. That is a required action of us on behalf of you all. Transportation demand data and land use scenarios modeling. We do this on behalf of the entire region and source that rather than having the individual jurisdictions have to take care of that individually. But we do run scenarios on request. And then we do have additional support services that we can provide on request, including support for land use planning, land suitability analysis, mapping services, and equity data. Under our local government resources, these are our economic development and support for jurisdictions activities. We do produce the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy, or CEDS. This is updated every 5 years, and it's a vehicle under the Economic Development Administration. The EDA uses this strategy and plan to support their analysis of applications for EDA funding on the region, to analyze their impact and economic need. Since 2009, $12.5 million have been invested by EDA for projects in our region. As Commissioner Peck mentioned, we do operate multiple regional revolving loan funds. Currently, those funds have about $1 million available for loan to small businesses to spur economic growth. Since these funds came to the COG, we've invested $16.4 million in 177 small businesses throughout the region. We do provide technical funding assistance to our jurisdictions, information and support related to their desire to access state and federal loan programs. Under the EDA, they currently have $3.5 billion available nationally for community building programs. Under the Infrastructure and Investments Job Act, there's multiple $1 billion of funding available for assorted transportation programs and other activities. The COG's been providing a notice of record service to both Senator Murray and Senator Cantwell's office to disseminate notice of funding opportunities to our regional jurisdictions. Currently, those federal offices are conducting their congressionally directed spending applications process, and so we've been busy coordinating meetings on behalf of our jurisdictions to evaluate programs, provide letters of support, and help them navigate that process. We do provide lead agency capacity where we can administer or apply for funds on behalf of our jurisdictions in the areas of our focus. Most recently, we received a $600,000 grant from the EPA for a brownfields assessment program that makes site-specific and area-wide planning as well as Phase 1 and Phase 2 environmental assessment available to properties in Benton or Franklin counties. Those can be owned by private property owners or municipalities. So this is a new program for us, but does have access to renewable funding sources. For example, Spokane has been using this program. They are on their 6th renewal of funding under EPA for development of properties in their region. So funding sources, the COG has 5 funding sources, 2 under what we would call our renewing program funding. That's our federal and state allocations programs, single opportunity grants, contracted services, and then local funds. So you can see on the right our funding breakdown for 2021. Our budget was just under $1.3 million, and of that, nearly 80% came from state or federal funding programs, with less than 20% coming from our local funds of that mix. Those renewing funding programs, on a biennium basis, we have our federal transportation funding. That does require a 13.5% local match from our jurisdictions. That includes Federal Highway Administration planning, Federal Transit planning, and then the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program. Additionally, we receive funding at a state level from WashDOT. That has 0 match required, so we always utilize those dollars first every year in our planning activities to try and maximize those local funds. For the Ben Franklin Transit, we do have a tri-party agreement between Ben Franklin Transit, the COG, and Washington Department of Transportation to ensure that the transit planning programs, the state planning programs, and our regional planning are all in cooperation and match each other. On the economic development side, we do have a renewing funding program for our Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy, or CEDS. This is a planning activity we have been doing on behalf of the region since the 80s. That is a 3-year, $225,000 grant. It is a 100% match, so $75,000 a year comes from our jurisdictions and $75,000 comes from the EDA. Under those single opportunity grants, those come to us in 2 ways. One would be a direct grant to the COG for a program that was under our mission area. The other is that lead agency, where we would apply for funding on behalf of one or more of our jurisdictions. So a direct grant example is in 2020, we received $400,000 from EDA for COVID relief activities and to support economic resiliency for the region. That allowed us to add a staff position for our staff that directly coordinates with our jurisdictions to provide support for funding and other economic activities. Our funding for this position does expire in June. This says 2021, it's actually 2022. This June it expires. We have made ARPA requests to both counties in the hopes of being able to continue that role for our organization. And then lead agency, we've already talked about our brownfields example. We do provide contracted services, or CAN. We do provide those to both the Benton County Public Facilities District and the Tri-City Regional Public Facilities District. This is not a significant revenue generator for us, but more a service that we can provide for those individual agencies. And then local funds. As part of our interlocal agreement with our jurisdictions, our members agree to fund the operations of the COG. Local funds are required to balance our organizational budget after all other forms of funding have been applied. So for the current fiscal year 2022, that budget is $260,774. That is split amongst our 17 jurisdictions. Again, we've talked about the matching requirements for programs. Only our federal transportation and CEDS planning currently have a matching element. Brownfields, for example, was a zero match program, so we are always excited for those. But the most important note about local funds is that the COG has for many, many years limited our requests to the local jurisdictions for funding to only what was required for those federal matching dollars. So we've operated with a very limited staff and subsidized overhead expenses when necessary from our own reserve funds to our own detriment. Those funds have nearly been depleted. If I'm brutally honest, there have been more than one occasion since I've been with the COG this year where I wasn't sure we were going to be able to cash flow payroll. So when you think about the dependency that our programs rely on federal funding, and you think about even a short federal funding shutdown and what that does to cash flow for staffing and programs, that could be a real problem for us. So this is the only source of funding we have besides the recouping indirect rates against those federal programs to operate and refill those coffers. So as we look at 2023, that will be a discussion topic we'll have to have with our members, is what is the level of service that you all need and expect from the COG, and what fiscally will that take for us to really be able to do consistently and with good quality. So support for Franklin County specifically, between 2017 and 2023, just over $2.8 million in transportation funding projects have been allocated during that time. For 2022 and 2023, that does include transportation improvement plan projects for Glade North Road pavement rehab, Pasco Colotus Road reconstruction, Basin City alternative transportation routes. We have provided at least one letter of support for congressionally directed spending in 2021, and as I mentioned, that is just coming around again for 22. Under economic development, we do have the Brownfields program that is underway. We quarterly coordinate technical assistance meetings with the congressional staffers to talk about specific projects and are there elements where they can provide support. And then we do on a regular basis provide technical assistance, educational programs for our jurisdictions. So when we look at that local funding and that dues assessment for 2022, Franklin County's dues to the COG were $11,629. That's 4.46% of our overall local funding pot. Since 1997, 1997, Franklin County has invested $279,026 into the COG, but your 5-year return on investment for transportation funding alone was $46 for every dollar that was invested in the COG. So we hope that you consider us a worthwhile and valuable investment, and we'll be open to conversations as we look at what the COG may need to continue to provide that level of support for you. Any questions?
Questions, commissioners?
No, thanks. As the current chair of the Benton Franklin Council of Governments, I think I understand it reasonably well. But great presentation, Michelle. Thank you. And maybe I just would make one quick observation. That is that the highway funds, even though they come often from the federal government and or the state and always through the state, our county and the other members are not able to access those funds unless they come through the COG. So while the 46-to-1 ratio of return on investment isn't $46 in COG money, it is money that wouldn't otherwise be available if we were not members of the COG.
That's correct.
Commissioner Mullen, any questions?
No questions. Great presentation. Very well. Appreciate it. Thank you.
So, Michelle, you heard the concern from the individual that came up to the mic, and it's a concern of mine too. We're growing so fast that we are getting into some territory that I experienced back in D.C. when I lived back there, and that was 5 minutes to Redskin Park and 2 hours to get home. What kind of conversations are we having about a bridge crossing the Columbia River in the Horn Rapids area on West Richland side, or Richland side, and then Sagemore on our side, somewhere in that vicinity? Is there any discussion right now taking place about a bridge crossing? And then what about the Road 100 area, about improving the traffic that's going to get worse because the houses are being built?
That is true. So on the bridge crossing discussion, there is not currently an active conversation about a fourth bridge crossing. There has been studies done in the past, is my understanding, that didn't substantiate the cost to benefit ratio for a fourth bridge crossing. That's not to say that the jurisdictions couldn't come back and say, we think it's time to restudy that, especially given the amount of housing growth that's happening on both sides of the river. So that's definitely something that should the jurisdictions desire to go back and revisit that would be something that the COG could coordinate on behalf of our jurisdictions to revisit that. On the Road 100 and Road 68, our transportation planners are working in cooperation with the consultant agencies that the city of Pasco has hired to look at those congestion areas and offer support alternatives to those. So we are actively participating in those conversations. And again, coordinating that information that comes both from comprehensive planning and local planning entities into what does that happen on a regional level.
And one other thing I'd like to add there is on the Road 68 corridor there coming south at Douglas Fruit, it would be very beneficial if we could get a slight curved truck takeoff to go down to Road 100 to get on the highway heading across to Yakima to Seattle. Right now there are trucks that are trying to make that turn on that more than a 90, and they're getting sort of hijacked there, and then the cars, we're going to have a major accident there. And so we need to really, and I've talked to the landowner, and he is in complete cooperation, wanting to utilize that triangle piece for that type of a truck accessibility down Road and then onto Road 100. So I think it's something that is, we've got everybody cooperating, and I've talked to our place, or our planning, our transportation department here in Franklin County, and very easily done, but we just got to get it done.
I will pass that on to our transportation planning staff. I am not a transportation planner, but I will pass that on to them as well. Additionally, we received feedback when I presented to the city of Kennewick, for example, and one gap in planning that they asked that perhaps the COG could fill in our planning is looking at not just the specific transportation projects that are currently underway for all of our jurisdictions, but what are the potential economic development impacts to transportation changes. So for example, in our Metropolitan Transportation Plan, which we're currently updating now, when that was last addressed, the expansion on this side of the river related to Dairy Gold and the Amazon warehouses and what that is going to do to truck traffic heading through the highway that then passes through Kennewick. They have specific concerns, but the planning related to that and the economic development decisions don't get brought to their individual jurisdiction. So they would really like for us to be able to look at how can we evaluate some of those impacts and help provide data to the jurisdictions to help them respond in scenarios like that.
And along those lines, I think that a fourth bridge would take the car traffic and leave that I-82 corridor available to truck traffic. When you push all that car traffic onto that crossing, then yeah, you create a very conglomerate of cars and trucks. And the other thing that has been suggested by more than one person is that Benton County already has it with the bypass highway around. We need to do the same thing in Franklin County and create a beltway around this whole area to help people to get to a point to go into the city where they need to go to. So that needs to also be looked at, where that fourth bridge would cross, included into that beltway, and that could be a solution for our area here with the growth that we're occurring. Yeah, so thank you.
Well, thank you for the input.
All right, are there any other questions?
A couple observations on local transportation. The discussion about another bridge crossing the Columbia was undertaken by the Council of Governments. It was probably close to a decade ago now. And I was initially on the committee that was reviewing that. I removed myself because one of the options that evolved was a second blue bridge, probably going through my living room at the Moore Mansion, and obvious conflict of interest, so I removed myself. But I did follow the process, and We looked at a number of options that ran everywhere from an extension of Oregon Avenue 397 across the Columbia to connect with 397 around the southern end of Kennewick. That one had a couple of real attractive features. One, it's already a truck route, and two, I think it's not a secret that we have trucks running up through the middle of Kennewick and 395 that carry hazmat materials. Some of them pretty dangerous, actually. And so to run those on a bypass around would be a public safety consideration. The other extreme or other end of the map where we looked was a north Richland crossing. I have been an advocate of both locations. There are obvious and I think substantial benefits to both. On the North Richland crossing, there was a pretty healthy discussion about Hanford lands and their accessibility and historical, native cultural and historical sites that produce some additional challenges, not things that couldn't be overcome in time. And then between those two, we'll call them extremes, there was discussion of the additional bridge next to the Blue Bridge, a Road 68 bridge, and even that far back, the state of Washington was already articulating that as we grow, and with the projected growth, especially in Franklin County, that in fact a beltway system was going to be necessary, and that is still WashDOT's position as of the last few months when I've spoken to them about it. And that clearly would favor bridge locations that would draw traffic away from the central part of the residential areas, i.e. a North Richland Bridge or a 397 Oregon Avenue Bridge. The process went as far as the committee voting on the options that they thought were best options, and it stalled when it became apparent that the going-in starting cost for any kind of environmental assessment was going to be at least $1 million that we didn't have. Not to mention at the time, I think the $25 to $40 million estimated cost of even building a bridge, which now is much, much bigger than that. So if this is going to happen, and I think it should, it's going to take federal money, state money, local money. Our state legislators are going to have to be heavily involved, and I think it happens in time, but it's going to take a lot of money and a fair amount of time. So thought I'd offer that perspective since I was involved with it. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Appreciate the presentation.
Commissioner Mullen.
Commissioner Mullen, go ahead.
I just have a question. If it's been years, those studies been looked at, are they looking at it now? Because we're already behind the race to get it done.
There has not been a request for a new bridge study.
No, I think there needs to be one.
Who should initiate that?
How do we go about making that request?
I would say that request could come to the COG from one or more jurisdictions, and then we figure out what it takes to get that funded.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
All right. Thank you.
So Keith, maybe you can find another jurisdiction, maybe a couple, maybe a whole handful. Let's submit it. Alrighty, next on the agenda is conversation of the clerk's collections positions to deputy clerk LPA 2. Eric.
Good morning, Commissioners. I bring this request on behalf of the county clerk to reclassify his clerk's collections officer position to an LPA 2 deputy clerk due to some staff turnover and just kind of a reevaluation of an ongoing reevaluation of positions in the clerk's office that the clerk has done over the last couple of years. The request today is not an additional FTE, but rather a conversion of an existing one. But I'm happy to answer any questions that you all may have.
Eric, we've had the benefit of the read aheads. Maybe you could give a little bit more detail for the audience as to cost impacts, staffing. You've already said it's not an additional position, but maybe get a little bit of the background that we have the benefit of from the ASR.
Of course. So the fiscal impact is just over $20,000 annual savings. Budget impact for the year, little over $18,000. likely more due to position vacancy while it's filled. So the current position, the clerk's collections officer is grade 14. The LPA 2 deputy clerk is a grade 13, so it's reclassifying it down a pay grade.
And I will clarify, that's 18,000 budget savings for 2022.
Correct.
Yes. So we're saving funds.
That's
in
correct.
both areas. Any other questions? Commissioner Mullen, any questions?
I have no questions. I
Move to approve Resolution 2022-059 as presented in the matter of the clerk's request.
There's been a motion there's been a motion and a second. Discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Next, we'll move down to the reclassification of the assessor's office position presented by Eric.
Hello again. So today's request is from the assessor. It's actually for several positions in the office, but the first one is for the chief deputy assessor position. So kind of all of this work is a culmination of months worth of work in partnership with the assessor to bring this forward before you. But with regard to the chief deputy assessor position, the assessor requested a reclassification based on internal comparators wanting to reclassify the position from a grade 18 to a grade 19. As part of any reclassification request, the process in HR is we review external comparators as well to see what our external comparators are. In doing that, found that a lot of our normal comparator entities that we use, the assessor's office is kind of structured differently depending on where you go. So it made the classification or compensation review a little more challenging. In that review, found that comparator data and job description comparability with regard to Benton County, with regard to the assessor's request to bring it to a grade 19, it was comparable. Our other comparators, such as Grant and Whitman counties, they didn't have a comparable position, so I couldn't conduct that analysis. And then similarly, Walla Walla and Lewis counties, the requested salary range was not comparable to the position. Those salary ranges were lower than the assessor's request. Because of just kind of that inconclusive data, I went out and explored other counties, went ahead and did reviews for Chelan County, Kittitas County, and Yakima counties. Chelan and Kittitas counties did not have comparable positions, and the requested salary range at the grade 19 was comparable to the Yakima County Chief Deputy Assessor position. So, like I said, the request from the assessor for that one is to make that to a grade 19. With regard to the fiscal impact for that position, that based on the occupant in that role currently, it would be just over $9,000. However, with the upcoming retirement of that individual, there will be likely more budget savings as a result of the person coming into that role would be at a lower step in that pay grade. And I'm happy to let the assessor talk about any additional, he's kind of worked up some numbers, anything if the board has any questions on with regard to that.
Is there, I would like to hear from the assessor on the actual
Mr. Chairman,
savings.
before we do that, I'd like to pose some questions to the
Commissioner
presenter.
Peck, go ahead.
So you noted that, or at least it sounded like you're doing your analysis based on the current incumbent who is very senior in that position. So when you're looking at a grade change for a position and you're evaluating what the fiscal impact is going to be, is it appropriate to do that using the current grade and step of the incumbent and compare it to the new grade at the same step? Or do you compare the incumbent current grade and step against the new grade at an entry-level step?
When I work up the fiscal impact figures, it's based on the incumbent in the position because factors can change. Certainly someone could choose not to retire or, any number of factors. So it's based on the current grade and step and what grade and step they would go to if the reclassification were approved.
So if the incumbent is a grade 18, step 7, and it's a request to go to a 19, then the fiscal impact is measured as a grade 19, step 7.
Correct. The
Okay.
county policy dictates where an incumbent would go into the step in the position if the change in.
I understand
Okay.
that. I'm just talking about when you report to us a fiscal impact of a proposed action, I just wanted to know the formula that you use, and I'm not suggesting that it's inappropriate, but it's not something I've ever heard discussed in this board, and it's frankly quite important, because if you were to say the incumbent's a grade 18, step 7, and the proposal is a grade 19, bringing somebody in fresh at a step 1, and you were to compare those two rates, that would be misleading, because it might show a temporary effect, but the long-term effect of changing the grade is actually much higher. So I'm happy to hear that you're using the incumbent's grade 18, step 7, and saying if we make this a grade 19, we need to compare it to a 19, step 7 to see what the true impact, potential impact is of making the grade change. So
Correct, and that's what that figure
want to have clarity,
reflects.
right?
Yep.
And refresh my memory, I don't have it up in front of me. What was that number for that position?
It was just over $9,000 or $9,026.
Right. And so we have a number of very similar comparator positions in the county. Can you give me a rundown of how comparable positions here in Franklin County are graded? Are they 17s, 18s, 19s?
The chief deputy positions in the elected offices, they vary. The chief deputy coroner is a grade 17. The chief deputy clerk is an 18. The chief deputy assessor is currently an 18. The chief appraiser is a 19. The chief deputy treasurer is a 19. The administrative accountant in the treasurer's office is a grade 19. The director of finance in the auditor's office is a 20. The director of audit services in the auditor's office is a 20, and the accounting supervisor in the auditor's office is a grade 19.
Okay, that's all helpful and useful. Thank you.
Eric, that is one heck of a great recall, I gotta say. That is very well done. Now, may I ask
Yeah.
why we didn't look at Grant County?
I did look at Grant County,
Oh, you
so
did?
they did not have a comparable position.
Oh, they
They
did.
only have a chief appraiser, and so there was no chief deputy assessor position.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
And so, Eric, you and I went over some of this preliminarily prior to the meeting. And one of the things that struck me is that we often go out and look at other counties for comparators, but nobody has spoken much in the past about what do we do when we look at other counties that are comparable size and similarly situated in terms of their revenues. What do we do when their positions don't look like ours, right? And so then the secondary step, in my opinion, is what we've done, what you and I did on the phone, and what we've done again here today, which is to look for equity among our middle and upper middle management leaders here in Franklin County. So my question for you is, realizing that there's some disparity here between the coroners at a 17, the treasurer at a 19, are you comfortable that these other grades are appropriate to those positions, or do you foresee those positions also being elevated such that all of our chief deputies would be 18s or 19s?
Just to give a little bit of historical context, so they landed in the current grades that they're in as a result of the comp study, and at the time the thinking was the philosophy was putting positions in the grades based on the work that they're performed. I believe given just the dynamics of county environment, and that these are political appointee positions, and kind of the extensive conversations had regarding around elected official salaries.
I apologize for the interruption. These are political appointee positions?
The chief deputy positions, that's my understanding. They
Political
serve at the
appointee.
pleasure of the elected official.
Well, they're at-will employees. They're not political appointees. We can discuss the merits of the language later. But
Okay. But where I was going with my train of thought was that that's my understanding, that that's what the nature of the position, so it's probably appropriate to place the chief deputy positions at the same grade. Otherwise, you as a board, myself as the director, we find ourselves in a position stating are the statutory functions of the treasurer's office greater than the statutory functions of the auditors, and getting into that comparator analysis, and it's probably appropriate that they are the same grade. I did not partner with the clerk or the coroner ahead of this, just because I wasn't sure what the board's direction was going to be, and certainly didn't want to make any assumptions on regarding their office. If that's the direction from the board, I'm happy to go partner with them and bring reclassifications in the future to you all.
I think we should wait for them to bring it to us,
Okay.
if they so choose.
So Eric, my pushback on the term political appointee is that the employees do not take on responsibility or assume any responsibility for any political activity associated with the office. They're middle and upper middle level managerial employees, at-will employees typically, and while they're typically hired by the elected official, in the absence of the elected official, they don't take on any of the authorities of that elected official, and that was why there was a bit of pushback there. So it may just come back to language and semantics, but I wanted you to know where I was coming from, and I think I understand what you were trying to say, which is in the absence of the elected official, they take on additional responsibilities at an executive level. So the other offices that you listed off here that are at a 17 or an 18, have any of them approached you about potential upgrades to those chief deputy positions?
I have not heard from the coroner this morning. The clerk did send an email requesting that, stating that he believes the chief deputy position should also all be equal.
Okay, and so when we did a comparative analysis, when I say we, your predecessor, Ms. Nave, and the HR department, and you participated in it, these positions were reviewed and graded based on the responsibilities of the position, right?
All positions in the comp study were, yes, including these.
Okay, so they were. And so it was determined that not all these chief deputy positions in terms of their responsibilities are equal.
At that time, yes, that was the determination. So,
Okay. Do you think that that's changed? Do you think that all these positions are now equal?
My belief is, based on the dynamics of the organization, that it makes sense to have them be equal, because, I mean, my experience tells me that every elected official is going to have a different determination about the functions of their office, and rightfully so. They place important specific weight on the duties of their office because they take their duties seriously. And so if you're truly looking, if you want to look at specific job duties and, in terms of if somebody has, impact to taxes versus finances or versus investment or versus elections, that's work that was done at the time, and that's where the kind of the philosophy was applied and where they landed separately in terms of pay grading. But I believe, based on my experience of the dynamics of this organization, being at the same pay grade is probably the most appropriate.
Okay, so you participated in that position study. Did you have that opinion at that time as well?
To clarify my involvement, so it was prior to my promotion to the HR director. Right. I coordinated with the offices on drafting their job descriptions.
Right.
The comparator data was put together by my predecessor, the HR director, and was reviewed with each elected official and department head at that time, and including, there was no mystery around it. It was all positions and where they were graded were given to elected officials and the department heads at that time, so that they could see where other positions were aligned. And at the time, I only recall a couple of, kind of some pushback or some requesting of reevaluation while that process was unfolding.
So you participated in the process. Yeah. You weren't the lead on it. Correct. You certainly, as the number 2 person in HR, were heavily involved, or I would think at least somewhat involved. Mm-hmm. Was it your position then that these positions should have all been the same grade, or is this an evolution from them till now? Is your view changed, is what I'm asking?
Yes, my view has changed, because the mission, the directive at the time was to classify based on positions and the job duties and the scope and complexity of them. And with regard to these particular positions, I should say my view has evolved and changed. Positions in general in the county, no, it should still be based on the scope and complexity of the job duties. But with regard to these positions, I believe they should be equal.
Okay, so what is it about the scope and complexity of these chief deputy positions that brings you there? And the reason I'm asking, to be clear, is that a study was done that looked at comparator counties, that looked at roles and responsibilities, that looked at job descriptions, and then it set grades for each of them. And you participated, and I recall quite clearly that you supported that at the time. That's why I was asking whether or not your thinking has evolved on this, and you have said that yes, it does. Yeah. And now you think that they should all be graded the same, 19. That's clear. What I'm looking for, since the position responsibilities haven't changed, it sounds to me, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, correct me if I'm wrong, sounds to me like you're saying that there is a component of responsibility to these positions that doesn't really reflect well or completely in a job description. And that is the necessity for that number 2 position, the one that reports to the elected official. In the absence of the elected official, has to take on some significant and additional executive level responsibility, whether it's coming in and briefing this board or dealing with those issues, that you think that that's a unique circumstance, and all of these should therefore be 19s. Is that a fair analysis of what I think I'm hearing you say?
That's correct.
Okay. I appreciate the time to go through that. It makes a difference in my thinking on these positions. Thank you.
Of course.
Commissioner Mullen, any questions? Commissioner Mullen, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
I think each department should bring forth their own recommendation as far as what their steps should be in there. I don't think they should all be the same. I think that each department has its own set of unique responsibilities and job duties.
Thank you, Commissioner Mullen, and that's exactly what I said. We leave it up to the head. But Eric, I want to compliment you on a great presentation and great recall.
Thank you.
Even though you might have went over it before, that's just great recall, and I want to compliment you on that. And at this time, if there's no other questions for Eric, I'd like to entertain a motion.
Make the motion that we approve.
There are actually 2 resolutions on this reclassification. There's 2022-060 and 2022-061.
You want to do them separately or both together at the same time?
Keith, I think we got to do them separate, correct?
No, not required to. You could, I'd recommend it just for clarity in the record.
Yes, they need to be separate.
Okay, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I will make a motion to approve the
Resolution 2022-060 is the first one. Resolution 2022-061 is the second one.
Make the motion to approve 061. I'm sorry, 060.
There's been a motion to approve Resolution 2022-060. Is there a second?
Second. Discussion.
There's been a second with discussion.
So what sometimes gets lost in these discussions about grades and steps and roles and responsibilities is sometimes we forget to stop and say, okay, well, we're going from an 18 to a 19. That's increasing cost to the taxpayers. We're escalating salaries, all of that discussion. Oftentimes, and again, today, we didn't have any discussion about what sort of an actual salary does this represent, and is it sufficient to attract and retain the high-quality people that we want to have in Franklin County? And while I tend to, I think, historically resist increases for the sake of increases. It's important to look at the proposed salary and what does that look like in this marketplace. And frankly, how many people do we want to lose to Benton County or to adjacent counties? And so while I think I've been done my due diligence in understanding exactly where you're coming from and why the proposal and why you support it, I am just by nature reluctant to make these increases. But in this case, the salary that this moves to, I would say, is not unreasonable in this marketplace, and therefore I'll be supporting the motion. Thanks.
So there's been a motion and a second for Resolution 2022-060. All in favor say aye.
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 Aye. I'm looking for a motion for Resolution 2022-061.
Make the motion to approve 2022-061 as presented.
Second with discussion.
There's been a motion for approval of Resolution 2022-061 with a second and discussion. Discussion.
So by Robert's rules, the maker of the motion has first right for discussion, so I'll defer to Commissioner Mullen, and if he doesn't have any questions, then I'll proceed.
Do you have any questions, Commissioner Mullen?
I have no questions on it, so.
Okay, so we didn't discuss this. I anticipated we'd have some detail from you and some discussion. So would you summarize for us? I've read the read ahead like everybody else, and you and I talked on the phone, but I think these matters, especially when we're spending the people's money and increasing positions, need to be aired out publicly. I don't believe in just making a motion and passing it. So would you summarize what this change is and what the costs are to the taxpayers?
Of course. So the request from the assessor today is to reclassify his appraiser positions. It's not a request to add any FTEs, but reclassify the currently budgeted ones. In the collective bargaining agreement, there's currently two appraiser classifications. There's a real property appraiser 1 classification and a real property appraiser 2 classification. The request from the assessor today is to create more distinction in the positions within that appraiser bargaining unit within his office to more closely align with the types of property that they're appraising. So the request from the the assessor is to create an appraiser trainee position at a pay grade 14, a residential appraiser position at a pay grade 15, a statistical analysis appraiser at a grade 16, an agricultural appraiser at a grade 17, and a commercial and industrial appraiser position at a grade 17 as well. I don't know if I stated that currently the real property appraiser 2 position is graded at a pay grade 14 in the collective bargaining agreement, and the real property appraiser, the real property appraiser 1 position is a grade 14. The real property appraiser 2 is a grade 16. Again, as was the case with the chief deputy assessor position, every assessor's office tends to do things differently, but what was common amongst all the, and I use the same comparator entities as I did with the chief deputy assessor position for these appraiser ones, is that there is an appraiser series and tends to be more appraiser classifications than just the 2 that we have. And so particularly, in Eastern Washington, agricultural appraisers were more common in the different assessor offices, as well as commercial appraiser positions as well. So again, there's not a request to add any positions, but reclassify the ones that are currently budgeted.
And so would it be fair to say that by reclassifying these different types of appraisal responsibilities, residential, agricultural, commercial, et cetera, we're acknowledging that the credentials, the experience, the responsibilities, the difficulty of those different types of appraisals is the basis for giving them different grades?
Correct.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's all I have.
All right, there's been a motion and a second for Resolution 2022-061. All in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Okay, moves us down to, thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Administration Office Business, Keith.
Yes, just have one item for your consideration this morning. I've been contacted by the representatives of the Port of Pasco. They are asking for the Board of Commissioners' support for a letter being sent to Senator Murray, Senator Cantwell, and Congressman Newhouse. This is for support for their congressionally directed spending request of up to $3.6 million to design, engineer, and construct what's called the last mile. It's the industrial rail project at the Ryman Industrial Complex. This rail line is primarily going to benefit the Dairygold project that's coming to Franklin County, but also it'll help them attract other processors and industrial clients to the Ryman section. This is a time of year that the congressional delegation is asking for a list of projects from local economic development groups. This one happens to come from the port. They are asking us to support that project, and it's just a letter signed by the chairman to represent the will of this board in supporting that industrial rail project.
I support signing the letter.
Commissioner Mullen, you support signing the letter?
I do. I believe it's a necessity. It needs to be done.
As I do. Thank you, Keith. And that's it?
I'll draft the final copy of it. There's a section in here that I'll add just a statement on how that benefits Franklin County, and then we'll give that to you, Mr. Chairman, to sign that.
So next we move down to public comment. I do have somebody that texted me that said they're trying to get online and they're not, or on the phone and they can't. Do you have any callers coming in? Is that because
Don't have any
Rocky's?
callers at the moment.
Is that because Rocky's on the line? Is why they can't phone in?
No, they should be able to call our public comment line and get connected.
546-5859. Is there anybody for public comment?
Good morning, Commissioners. I would encourage you to rapidly apply with BFCOG for that study that has been done in the past and needs to be reevaluated and looked at again. I appreciate that study that was done many years ago didn't indicate that we needed another bridge across the river, and I think it's very evident, even to us that are not traffic engineers, that we need our traffic looked at locally, and would encourage you to do that quickly. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
Two questions arose when the Colville Indians made their presentation. One said that they would be contacting you individually, which again brings up an improper method of communication. I think that the commissioners ought to make sure that they step back when contacted by the tribe and say, please present it to the board. And the other thing that bothered me, the payment in lieu of taxes, they were talking a number roughly 2%, and everybody said it's negotiable and whatnot. But the one thing they said, that they would decide how it's to be distributed to what's provided from the tribe and what's provided from the community. I think that needs to be clarified in any negotiations further down the road, that it's a set amount to the county and not what they feel is, oh, well, we think the tribe gave more this year and you're going to get less. Thank you.
Keith, you want to address the individual meetings? Those have all been canceled.
Yes, they had requested an opportunity to be before the board, and because of the nature of some of those discussions, it was really my suggestion that we meet individually. I recognize the problem that creates, so we had them come directly to the board as a group, and we'll continue with that way of communication going forward. They can contact me if they have matters that they want to discuss with the board. We'll do that in our open public session.
Okay, is there anybody else for public comment?
I do have one caller that's
Okay.
finally connected. Good morning, Wanda.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I tried calling 6 times this number, and I just kept getting a recording. It was strange. Anyhow, but the reason why I'm calling is I understand that the plaintiffs in the redistricting has decided to file suit, and I just wanted to first thank Commissioner Mullen and Commissioner Didier, because as they ran for office, they promised that they would create a fair process for everyone, and I know it seemed like that many were trying to appease the possible plaintiffs and to do a go-around on the process, and I just appreciate that. I was speaking to someone who was telling me, you know, as long as you created a fair and equal process for everyone, that he is confident that we will prevail, because we made sure that every I was dotted and T was checked. So I just wanted to do a shout out for them and appreciate their representation for all the people of Franklin County and not just possible plaintiffs. And then the other thing that I wanted to talk about was the Colville tribe's thoughts on putting in a casino, and I don't know if they're still there. I just was wondering why it seems like casinos are their only business plan. I feel like in our area, we're a very family-oriented area. I wish that they would create maybe a Native American Disneyland of some sort. I just know with the state's rules now that tie the hands of our police officers, I don't think all the money in the world would help us, because casinos are known to bring in sex trade, prostitution, drugs, which we're already fighting, and I just feel like it would make it unsurmountable. And our officers, I don't know if we've looked at the data or the community impact that casinos have on an area. I know it's far down the road because there's still a situation between their tribe and the Yakima tribe, but it's just something that, you know, down the road we need to ask those questions and really understand, is this a good fit for our area, and isn't there another business model that would actually benefit and enrich our community instead of creating more problems for it. So those were my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. So is there anybody else for a public comment? Seeing none, is there any other business for the good of the county? Commissioner Mullen, anything? Keith, if I... Go ahead. Go ahead, Commissioner Mullen.
Only that we need to get a hold of the COG to see if we can get a study done so that we can get moving forward on bridge across the Columbia.
I agree.
I'll just add that I think the COG would probably be more than happy to entertain a request like that. The question is going to be who will pay for it and how, and looking forward to having that conversation.
So with that, Keith, I would like to request that one thing that was said by the Colville was the increase in the jail. That sort of alarmed me a little bit. And so if we could maybe just call the Sheriff's Department in Yakima and some of the, and see what the increase was in jail activity after a casino came in. I think that's something that we probably need to look at, because that could be a determination on what percentage we are talking about.
Yeah, we've had some initial conversations around that topic already with the sheriff's office, and that's a topic or a area of discussion that needs to mature and ripen in the right way.
So it's already taken place? They are
Yes,
already
yeah,
looking into that?
Yeah, they're already aware that
Good.
that's a requirement for our support.
All right. So we still have public comment.
That really raised a question for me when that comment was made about the jail. Because this potentially it will become tribal lands, are we going to have another law enforcement entity within our jurisdiction of Franklin County? Will they have their own police force? And I don't know, just but curious about what that might look like. Thanks.
So I can speak to that a little bit. The jurisdictions and the responsibilities, to my understanding, can be separate. The tribes have authority on the federal lands that are in federal trust for the tribe. But my understanding is also that more often it's a cooperative relationship between the local government, law enforcement, and the tribe. And those are just some of the many important deliberations and agreements that need to be spelled out in an interlocal or other agreement with the tribe. So there are many, many issues like that, not just law enforcement, but I agree law enforcement is a major one because it tends to drive a lot of the costs, incarceration, apprehension, trials, so forth. So that's, it's not going to be a short or simple discussion, and the 2% that was mentioned earlier, my understanding is that that's a statutory minimum, and I don't know anyone that looks to that as being in the realm of adequate to cover the costs. But again, it comes down to what responsibilities the tribes would ask the local governments to take on versus which responsibilities the tribes themselves would take on. And lastly, payment in lieu of taxes is the concept, and because it would be federal land, they wouldn't be paying property taxes, and therefore there would be payment in lieu of those taxes as well as compensation under a services agreement. But still a lot of work to do there.
All right, with that, if there's no other business for the good of the county, this meeting is adjourned.